Welcome to Kaiser Watch with John Kaiser. I'm your host, Jim Goddard. John, what's coming up on the show today?
Jim, we're going to talk about one of my favorites that actually went up rather than down this past week, Patriot Battery Metals, and a couple of bottom fish that I've talked about recently. In fact, one is VR Resources, which just provided another piece of important information for its Silverback project. And the other is Endurance Gold, which also produced assays for a very important hole.
Why did Patriot Battery Metals jump in price?
This was quite a surprise. The stock was, Patriot Battery Metals was languishing at $265. It had been so that low earlier and bounced back a bit, but now it was doing that year-end fade. But on December 18th, it announced a Canadian $69 million financing at $4.42, which was a 65% premium from the volume-weighted average price for the past 30 days, and it was with Volkswagen, the German car maker, the biggest European EV car maker, in fact. And this will give Volkswagen a 9.9% equity stake in Patriot Battery Metals. And part of this deal is that they will enter a binding offtake agreement for Patriot Battery Metals to supply 100,000 tons of spodumene concentrate to Volkswagen's 100% owned PowerCo battery subsidiary over a 10-year period, and with an option to extend it another 5 years. Now, the price will be determined by a complex index-based formula, but you can be pretty sure that based on the PEA that PMET published in August, it's going to have to be about $1,500 per ton of spodumene concentrate, which they used as their base case price. And the actual price right now is about $835 per ton, which is pretty low, roughly half of what the PMET needs to make the Jackie Chu project worth developing. So, and lithium carbonate itself has been since July flatlining in that sort of $470 to $475 per pound range, which is also less than half the minimum $10 per pound needed to meet the demand expectations by 2030, if in fact the EV sector continues to grow and doesn't just disappear to be replaced by internal combustion engines forever. Now, what's interesting is that the spodumene concentrate will be shipped to the St. Thomas gigafactory that Volkswagen is developing in Ontario. This will have a significant capacity of 90 gigawatt hours of output, which is the way they measure how much power the batteries have. And supposedly that's enough to supply 1 million cars production annually. So that's a pretty aggressive scenario. And the 100,000 tons would be 12.5% of the 800,000 tons of concentrate PMET would be producing by year 4. So this is I thought this was a very, very positive development. It's like bottom fishing by the big guys, but it's also sending a signal that the car makers are not all giving up, even though sales have currently slumped, and there is this big backlash against electric vehicles coming in the United States. Now, interestingly, on the very same day, the United States announced that it was providing a conditional $775 million loan to an Australian company called Novonix to build a battery-grade graphite plant in Tennessee. Now, I've always been under the impression that the graphite needed for the anode in lithium-ion batteries needs to be natural flake graphite that you mine from the ground. And there's a lot of juniors out there, well, not a lot, but a number of them who are out there developing graphite deposits, which they feel will be needed to make these EV batteries possible down the road. And the big problem is that China supplies 86% of natural graphite, and it has introduced graphite export controls, but that seems to have not bothered the graphite flake price because it's dropped from a $900 a ton price in early 2023 to a current level of about $465 per ton, where it seems to be stuck. And there doesn't seem to be much of a big fuss. Now, you would think, okay, giving almost $1 billion to some Australian company to build a graphite plant would be a shot in the arm for resource juniors. Well, there's a hitch to this. The plant that Novonix is building is a plant to make synthetic graphite, which is made from a byproduct of cracking oil to make gasoline. It's needle coke, particular variety of the whole range of petroleum coke, and this. What's interesting is, as I mentioned earlier, that I thought natural flake graphite was preferable, but it's only preferable because it's cheaper, and the synthetic graphite is more expensive. And I've always wondered, well, who cares about graphite if it is synthetic graphite's just as good? And it turns out that car makers such as Tesla prefer synthetic graphite, even though it's more expensive, because it gives a longer range to the batteries and a longer life. So if you want to have a quality EV rather than one of those cheaper ones, synthetic graphite is what you want. And this is an interesting development because this plant is going to be built in Tennessee, which is a Republican state, a Trump state. In fact, many of the handouts for the energy transition, loans and whatnot, under the Inflation Reduction Act have ended up in states that religiously have voted for Trump. And the big bluster coming from the Trump camp right now is he's going to do his absolute best to kill the energy transition policies, revoke the IRA, and do what he can to promote internal combustion engine cars. And this is kind of interesting because right now Elon Musk, who controls Tesla, he's become such a big shot. He's even telling the Republican Party what they need to do with bills and all that. He's like de facto declared himself president. And that's going to be interesting, kind of conflict when Trump takes power on January 20th. And the problem is the traditional buyers of Teslas have all been of the liberal-minded sort. And now Trump's brand is toxic, and I don't know too many liberals who are keen on buying a Tesla in the near future. And electric vehicles have always been toxic to the MAGA crowd, which thinks that the climate change and all that is a bunch of bullshit, even though lots and lots of households are now being denied home insurance because of flood or fire risk, which is potentially setting up a real estate collapse in America because banks, when they grant mortgages, they want you to have fire insurance. But the insurance industry is getting clobbered in areas where fires wipe out large areas of homes and where hurricanes, which are getting more and more intense, are wiping out homes. So it's going to be interesting to see to what extent Trump actually does roll back the Inflation Reduction Act. I've been sort of fairly pessimistic about the future for the electric vehicles and the lithium juniors, but I may have been unnecessarily so. Trump will probably have to strike a balance with Elon Musk and Tesla because right now they don't really want to see Tesla tank because in China, which is half of its sales are in China, the Chinese domestic car makers are being supported by Beijing, not the foreign car makers. And while in China, Musk has all the raw material supplies needed to make his Teslas there, which are then sold in China, these raw materials are becoming scarce in the United States, and the scarcity will increase. And if the EV sector growth trend is simply in a slump, and as solid state batteries become a reality, the demand will go much higher. So I'm beginning to think that maybe all this bluster right now is for show, and some of the energy transition goals will actually be allowed. Now, when I read the Patriot Battery Metals press release, there was an interesting mention in there that Volkswagen is partnered with QuantumScape. So I checked out who on earth that is, and it turns out it is a developer of a solid-state lithium battery. And what its innovation is that it has created a ceramic separator that is solid state. So you do not have to have this hydrocarbon-based fluid as a separator in the type of lithium-ion battery that requires a graphite as the anode. So it is pushing this as the solution to the danger of the flammable lithium-ion battery when it short circuits as a result of a crash. And of course, if this works, it will allow lithium metal to be the anode rather than graphite. So there are two things that are going against natural graphite juniors. One is the fact that synthetic graphite can be made from petroleum refining byproducts, and there's going to be no shortage of that in the United States. And the other is that the demand for graphite for the anode of lithium-ion batteries is going to disappear if efforts by QuantumScape and Toyota end up being successful in delivering a solid-state lithium battery. And that's, of course, also important for the EV sector, because the reluctance right now is because the cars are too expensive for the range and charge times currently available for these cars. So, but with all these developments happening, we could see the 2030 goals of EVs starting to replace ICE vehicles become part of something that people believe in again, rather than just sitting back, resigned. Yeah, Trump's going to turn this country into a fossil fuel type of car museum, similar to all those finned cars from the 50s and 60s that ended up in Venezuela after cars got modernized in the United States. I kind of see this vision of America having these old clunker petroleum cars still driving around while the rest of the world is humming around in electric vehicles. And so I don't think that's going to happen. So my pessimism about the lithium sector is a little less after seeing this Volkswagen deal to finance Patriot Battery Metals at a premium to the market.
What did the IP survey reveal about the Silverback project of VR Resources?
Well, last week in the Kaiser Watch episode, I talked about the Empire project, which is a platinum group metal and copper potential clone for the Lac des Îles deposit, about 100 kilometers to the east, and the potential that even if this is not as good as Lac des Îles, if it is much better than what is known for this region, it's a proof of concept that the Marmion batholith is in fact fertile for Lac des Îles type of deposit. So they're waiting for the rush assays. They're not going to tell us anything about them because they're technically not material, and they will use this as guidance to decide whether these other magnetic anomalies that are in this region of the Empire District should be staked as potential real Lac des Îles type targets, because they're all under bush and overburden, and nobody has ever had a reason to spend money to poke a hole into them to see what they are. But VR Resources may have a reason to stake these over the next couple of weeks. But the other story I talked about was the Silverback story, and I said an important upcoming milestone is this DCIP survey, the 3D version that they have conducted over this mafic dike target that they call Silverback. And Byron Holbeck had staked this in 2023, and in early 2024, he drilled a couple of holes. And one of those holes went into the Mayfic dike, and the grades are low, 0.15% nickel, and he didn't push it all the way through, so we don't know what the nickel grade will eventually end up with. But the general view is that these dikes have been known, and they're probably not going to be rich enough in nickel to be economic deposits. But on the way to this dike, the hole intersected a porphyritic unit, a dike that had intruded it, and it was anomalous in copper and gold. And this is what really intrigued Mike Gunning and Justin Daly, who had started cultivating a relationship with Byron Holbeck over a year ago. And Byron is a prospector who does a lot of work for logging companies, building roads and so on. And so he's become a prospector in the process. And he's an unusual prospector because he actually spends his own money taking the claim beyond just map stake claims and some visual descriptions scavenged from assessment files. He actually does geophysical surveys, and in this case, he drilled a couple of holes. And his Digim survey, which is sort of a cheap type of survey, not done that much anymore, it did reveal a number of these conductor anomalies. But what was really interesting about this project was that near a road, he had, for whatever reason, picked a spot and scraped away the moss and overburden and managed to find an outcrop that ran a 5.6% copper, 9.8 gram per ton gold, and 49 gram per ton silver. And Mike and Justin looked at this and said, this is like a sheared rock that has been mineralized by remobilized, metals from a fluid from another source. And that's where they started developing this idea that, wow, I wonder if to the east of this, where they have figured out a number of north-south faults, parallel faults that cut through this east-west trending Mayfic dike, they started to wonder, gosh, could a younger intrusion have come up this dike and in the process digested its metallic content, which on its own would be too low grade to be worth anything, but as an intrusion digests this material, coming up this structural path, this metal will end up being concentrated, and then when it's stalled near the current surface and started turning into this porphyry system, just spewing the hydrothermal fluids all around, maybe it developed a possible Hemlo style system. And Hemlo was a 20 million ounce high-grade deposit discovered several hundred kilometers to the east near Wawa in an area where there was gold mineralization known, but nothing substantial, and it was sort of near the limits of the Kapuskasing structural zone, so that would erect everything, and there shouldn't have been a deposit, and yet they found this phenomenal 20 million ounce deposit, which ended up straddling three company groups' properties. One of them, which LAC had grabbed, ended up being given by the courts back to Corona because they ruled that LAC had stolen proprietary information from Corona. And this was a phenomenal discovery that kicked off a huge area play back in 1982, and after drilling 80 holes or so and not coming up with anything, somebody told Murray Pesham's team to step to the other side of the fault, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, they started getting these assays. And what exactly created Hemlo is controversial. It is believed to be some sort of porphyritic intrusion that managed to harvest gold, a lot of gold, and then drop it out in this particular area. And nothing like it has ever been found again. Now, in this region where VR Resources is now, there are deposits like Hammond Reef, which is a 10 million ounce system that Agnico Eagle owns now. That was one of my my better bottom fish from over a decade ago when this sector wasn't as crappy as it is today. Brett went from 30 cents to being bought out at $4. So that was a great score, and that type of system might also be present. But on December 18th, when they got the results, they finally got it. They couldn't believe their eyes, because exactly where they expected this big chargeability anomaly indicating sulfide, the presence of sulfides, it was where it was supposed to be, straddling that fault right across the where that mafic dike crosses, and the mafic dike itself has a sort of on the short width blowouts. It's much wider there in this particular area. And interestingly, this chargeability anomaly is to the west of where the Ditcham anomaly had this sort of salamander-shaped target, which turns out to almost perfectly overlap with a lake. And I suspect that is probably a mirage caused by lake bottom sediments, which in the industry they call loon shit. And but here was this big chargeability anomaly, and there was also one near that hole number 2 that Byron had drilled. And when I was talking to Mike Gunning, he says, there was also a chargeability anomaly, not as big as the main one, but he said if Byron had colored that hole a couple hundred meters to the north, he would have been into that, and instead of just getting this dike dike unit that's anomalous and then the low grade nickel, he might have had a completely different story on his hands, and VR Resources would probably never have been able to option the property. So this news is a very positive development. They plan to drill it in January as soon as they can. It's readily accessible. They've done a memorandum of understanding with the Lac des Mille First Nations group in this area, which is a group that actually does work with companies and has a business mindset, as opposed to some other groups much farther north. So to me, this was a major milestone, because now we have 2 stories. We don't know what will happen at Empire. Full assays will be required. They won't have those until the second half of January. But this target is very juicy. Again, it could be nothing. This is why the stock's 6-7 cents and not way up there. You do need intersections. But the geological context for the Silverback, it is fantastic, and given the scale of it, it's going to take at least until the second half of next year to kill this. So VR Resources started off as a rock bottom fish at 3 cents, has doubled in the past week and a half, and now has 2 high impact stories, rethinking a region where this sort of stuff isn't supposed to exist, that they think may be present. So that's one that I have bought myself and would like to buy more of. So I'm hopeful that there's a whole bunch of year-end tax loss selling that takes the stock back below a nickel and allows one to back up the truck.
Why did Endurance Gold accelerate its Reliance project payments?
Well, several weeks ago, I did a Kaiser Watch episode where I walked through all the pending holds for the Reliance project, which is this epizonal orogenic system that they've traced for over 1,500 meters in southeastern British Columbia, about 10 kilometers from the historic Braylorn mine, where 4 million high-grade ounces have been mined in the past, something that companies actually aren't allowed to say in their press releases unless there's some 43101 report supports it, which is part of this craziness going on in the regulators who hate the resource juniors with an absolute passion and are determined to make sure nobody sees the potential upside of anything. Anyways, this week they put out 2 releases. The first one was assays for hole 106. And what was interesting about it is that it had 2 intervals. The first one had good grades. It was the down dip extension of the Imperial Zone, and it was the deepest down dip extension yet of the mineralization within the Royal Treasure corridor. But couple hundred meters deeper, they had another high grade interval, which they weren't really expecting, but they had seen mild alteration beyond the alteration, that the anchorite alteration that's just at the underneath the hanging wall of the argillite shear that's been thrust over this zone. And they ended up in a somewhat differently altered rock, what they now call the Lower Imperial Zone. And they'd started seeing hints of this a little bit farther up the hill, where the new Diplomat Zone, where they've had good success this year so far with some very, very splashy numbers. And when you looked at their section, you could see that all the holes drilled through the Imperial Zone had been stopped once they got beyond the initial alteration part. And now there is the possibility that there's a blind parallel zone in slightly different altered rock, which if they push these holes deeper or drill other ones, they could end up having double the sort of tonnage footprint for these mineralized zones. So that was a very positive development. It was also the deepest that high-grade mineralization has been intersected at Reliance. Did the market care? No. Once again, it was a big shrug. Nothing happened. Like it maybe traded 30,000 shares between 13 and 14 cents, where it still sits today. Well, a couple of days later, they put out another press release where they have accelerated all their property payments on not just the Reliance project, which was optioned in late 2019, but also on all these various properties to the north adjoining the Reliance property, which they call the Olympic Group, and it will result in them paying a couple $100,000 and issuing 3.1 million shares, which will be subject to hold restrictions. And of course, in this industry, everything is like you do it at the last minute. You never accelerate anything. And I asked Robert Boyd, why would you issue all this paper this early and instead of just waiting for when you're actually required to do it? And he said, we get interest from various parties in our project, but a sticking point for them is that we do not yet have full title. So he said, we've got the cash. Stock's not going anywhere anyways right now because the big guys want to see us own full title to this, and investors themselves, maybe they'll be impressed by it, though I doubt that very much. So they said, they bit the bullet, said, let's accelerate it. The vendors will all be happy because they don't have to wait, several more years to get all their payments and paper. So now they own 100% of the whole property, and currently they have a graphic which still shows all the bits and pieces option from various parties. Future maps will show this as one large land package. And based on the work they did this summer, more field sampling, soil sampling work in that sort of northern part, they have developed other trends within that area that may get drill holes next year. So why not make this all one secure property owned 100% with no little glitches, somebody forgot to do something or somebody files a lawsuit claiming this wasn't done properly or whatever. Now they own it all. And so if any major becomes interested in this play, they don't have to worry about this aspect. And as I was going over this, the map, and I noticed a little showing called Stibnite, and I asked Robert about the Stibnite, and a lot of juniors are now pumping antimony because the antimony price is at an all-time high because China has created export controls, partly as punishment for the United States restriction of high-end export of high-end chips to China, but also because their own supply is is dwindling, that the big mine that they had is no longer as robust as it used to be. So they're kind of thinking of hoarding their domestic supply, and if they can punish the United States in the process and warn it, give an example of what might happen if the United States really gets them mad at this America First nation, other things that they can restrict, such as rare earths and tungsten type of thing. But antimony is one of these sort of pathfinders. It's not 100% correlated. Robert says that it's about a 0.3 correlation, a 30% correlation with gold grades. But when they do see antimony, they do look for the gold. The antimony seems to be a later stage emplacement in this area, but he said that, back in the old days, 100 years ago, the prospectors did look for high-grade antimony veins, and what they found was discontinuous, and what kind of hung together was lower grade, more like 0.3 to 0.5% rather than 1% plus. But people should know that this isn't just a gold play. This is also a potential antimony play. They're not looking for antimony targets, but as they become more aggressive exploring the entire property, who knows what antimony zones they might come across. And I'd like to mention Perpetua Gold Corp is finally on the threshold of becoming a mine with its Stibnite project in Idaho, where gold is the dominant metal, but antimony is a byproduct. That there are high-grade antimony lenses in the vicinity. They're not within the mining plan, but there they could actually drive an adit to these high-grade lenses if it became an emergency situation in the United States to come up with antimony. So, I kind of scoff at juniors which are touting the antimony that's present in their gold play. But in this case, the antimony could show up. It's not what we're counting on. We're counting on Reliance to become a major high-grade gold system, but you can stick that antimony feather in your cap. Go ahead and do it.
John, thank you so much for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
We've been speaking with John Kaiser. I'm Jim Goddard. Comments made on Kaiser Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as a recommendation to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at kaiserresearch.com.